Dermot again, and just a continuation, I suppose, on the series that I'm doing on addiction and recovery. And just today, I'm just going to look at chemical dependency and addiction, and just what that entails, what they entail, how they affect you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. So I'll just run through that. Okay. So if you look at this wee diagram here, and it's quite hard to see, sorry about that, but you look, addiction is the center, it's the core, and everything is a spin-off, everything is a consequence from that addiction. So if you just look at all the wee bubbles there, you see domestic violence, emotional distress, economic problems, employability or unemployability, sexually transmitted diseases, low self-esteem, self-harm, transgenerational effects, suicide, criminality, sorry, my eyes can't great, death, dysfunctionality, antisocial behavior, what's that one? Broken families, I have to get my glasses, sorry about that. Shattered lives, child abuse, cardiovascular disease, liver disease, cancer, and mental health. So as you can see from that, there's a massive spin-off to addiction and just how addiction affects the individual or the one person in that sense. And I kind of break it down a wee bit as we go along. So addiction is a primary disease, and what we mean by that is some people say, well, I became addicted because I had this, or I became addicted because of that. What we tend to say is, look at your addiction. I know not everybody agrees on the disease concept of addiction, but the World Health Organization does state that it is a disease. But in the sense, if you look at dis-ease, ill at ease, you're not right, and that's definitely a factor in addiction. You're not right. You're not in the right frame of mind. But everything kind of is a spin-off from that, as you saw from the last diagram. So it's not, you don't become an alcoholic because of, or an addict because of. A lot of things that happen to you happen because of your addiction. It has identifiable signs and symptoms. So as they say, it's progressive. It gets worse over time. It never gets to a certain level and plateaus. It continuously gets worse as it progresses. It's chronic, and how we mean by that is chronic is that there is actually no known cure at this moment in time. Different things work for different people, but you can't say, well, if you take, like for cancer, if you take chemotherapy and radiotherapy and surgery, there's a good chance you'll cure your cancer. This is not the case with addiction. Addiction is so incepted inside the human psyche and body and etc. that each person is different in a sense. There's no cure as a sense, but you can live with it, if you know what I mean. So it's there for life, really. So once you have an addiction, you have it for life. It's the main cause of many cancers. Aggravates a lot of cancers. So what can be that? Throat cancer, mouth cancer, esophagitis, esophagus cancer, stomach cancers, and the list can go on. And it does kill it. As I say, it's terminal if you if you don't address it. Addiction will eventually kill you. Be it drugs or alcohol, will eventually kill you in one way or another. As they say, the saying, smoking, one in every two smokers will die of smoking-related illnesses, and it's the same with drugs and alcohol. So again, why? Well, I suppose in a sense, if you look at a person's life situation, difficult situation, or coping, how do you cope in life? And as society goes, well, a lot of people, we say 8 out of 10 people who've come into kind of treatment would have suffered a trauma in the past. So there could be PTSD difficulties, which are our main trigger. A person who suffers from trauma uses alcohol or drugs as an anesthetic to relieve them of the pain of that trauma. So you take away the drugs and alcohol, they have nothing to cope with. So, again, it can be difficult in that sense. So as it says there, a difficult situation or a feeling that is very hard to deal with or cope with. The first reaction for most people is, I need to numb the pain. I need to anesthetize myself. So the best way to do it is drink or drugs. Takes a drink or drugs, feels good and relaxed for that moment in time, but that does wear off, and then the person feels bad until the next time they do. It's so overwhelming they have to go again. And again, you've got a difficult situation of feeling, and the same again, you can get a physical craving, and you say, I need a drink, drugs, drink, drug use, feel good. You fill that physical craving, so it's now gone from emotional to physical. And then the long-term problems, as you say, which happen because of addiction, as you say, financial, legal, relationship, work, etc. Sorry. So progression, we look at how the progression works. So I take alcohol for an example, and I'll use that because it's probably one of the most commonly used drugs out there. So, why would people drink? And I'm looking here from, say, teens to 50s, and that's just the age span. It doesn't have to follow that. Some people's progression is faster than other people's progression. Some people can progress very quickly in the matter of only a number of years. Other people can take 15 to 20 years, just depending on the drinking patterns, etc. But if you take, for example, a teenager who takes their first drink, they're going to feel, if you look at the turquoise color, is elation high. They're going to feel good at first. They might not like the taste, but they will like the effect. It takes them out of themselves. Depression, which is in the green, will be very low to minimum, non-existent. And then the progression does kind of start there because the body becomes tolerant, and then it levels off and it wants more to feel the same feeling. And that's where the progression starts. And you find the elation starts to drop over a period of time. Those, as I say, between 20s, 30s, 40s. And in the same time as the elation or the high goes down, you never get the same high, the depression will start to increase. That's the depression of the following day. And remember, alcohol is a natural depressant anyway, so it'll cause depression. The progression is slowly going up. And in my diagram there, it says it peaks off, say, around about the 30s and mid-30s, where I suppose progression and depression, elation all around about the same. Then it does a strange thing. The progression can start to go backwards, start to go down the way, whereas your body cannot take the same amount of alcohol that it took before. The elation or the good feeling dips below the depression. So what happens there is people are now using alcohol to combat depression because they're coming out of themselves, taking them out of their problems. And at the same time, the progression is going down. So if you ever see, for example, a street drinker, and they seem to get drunk very quickly on very little because their body is more or less saturated. So the end of the spectrum there, as you can see there, it's there's no elation, there's no feel good. So people are drinking just to try and feel normal. Okay. And again, substance misuse in that diagram, so it creates distorted thinking, distorted routines and habits, cravings, triggers, lifestyle stresses, etc. Right, so how it affects us. Well, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and then socially. So mentally, I spelled that wrong. We said the placebo effect, it's the mind, it's the reward part of the mind. The mind can get tricked into thinking that it's getting a reward, a bit like Pavlov's dog. Heard of that, where he would condition his dogs to know when they're going to get fed, and by ringing bells, to put the food in front of them, then he'd ring a bell and eat. You can read into it, but it's a similar kind of thing. There's a reward part of our mind that a dopamine hit, a dopamine rush. Even before you take the drink, it's there because you're expecting it. The cravings, the mental cravings, in a sense, the thoughts, and the thoughts can get rampant and go out of control at times. Again, you can control them, but in early recovery, it's very hard to do that because it almost dominates every single thought you have. Triggers dopamine, that's what it does, the dopamine in your brain. You take alcohol, it triggers that. And any kind of addiction triggers dopamine. Again, go back to the reward bit. If your phone pings, it triggers a dopamine rush. So anything can do that. The distorted thinking, and of course, yes, when you're under the influence, your thinking is not right. But also the distorted thinking as, people will live in a state of denial and not in reality. So the reality will be distorted. And it kills your brain cells. That's what it does. It does it very well. And those brain cells are never replaced, really. Blackouts, and those are memory blackouts. It's not passing out or falling down. It's when you wake up the next day and you can't remember what you did the night before, or you have blanks missing, and that's what we call blackouts. And it's almost like the memory part of your brain cannot absorb what's happening, and it just cuts off. And those memories never come back. It's almost like they just don't happen. And then memory loss is just for short-term memory loss, more so than long-term memory loss, where you might forget where you put your car keys, and just small things start to go. Psychosis. In the sense of psychosis, people going through psychotic episodes, and again, that's just related to also the mood, but that can lash out, become very aggressive, very violent. Dissociation, and in the sense, living in an altered state or an altered reality. You might see that when people also suffer from trauma, where they kind of have not a dual personality as such, but they kind of can distance themselves from reality, from having an out-of-body experience in a sense. And it's a similar kind of thing. It's taking yourself away from reality in that sense, or from what's happening around you. Alcohol seizure fits, and again, they're mental, and then again, that's from acute withdrawal. Normally what happens is you say, if it's dangerous just to stop drinking, if you are drinking, and you need to wean yourself off it, or get medication to help you wean off it. Because if you suddenly stop, you go into fits, and they can be fatal. And then wet brain, or Korsakoff syndrome, or what they call ARBI, and that's irreversible, but it can be stopped. They say use of vitamin B is good to combat that, but that's just from long-term alcohol use, and it just kills the brains. Your kind of motor neuron functions start to slow down, so your motor functions will slow down. And then strokes, of course, because you're weakening your arteries. So physically, you become chemically dependent, and then in a sense, what chemical dependence, the difference between that and addiction is, your cells, everything down to the cells, become addicted to alcohol or drugs. So it's not just a mental addiction or an emotional addiction; it's a physical addiction. The whole body suddenly now craves alcohol, drugs. Throat cancers, as I said in the beginning, there are lots of different cancers. Throat cancer is one. Mouth cancer, esophagitis, coronary diseases, heart disease, heart attacks, reflux problems, digestive problems, high cholesterol, lung cancers, stomach ulcers, emphysema, stomach cancer again, pancreatitis, kidney failure, cirrhosis of the liver, anemia, septicemia or blood poisoning, and hepatitis. Arthritis and rheumatism, circulation problems, overly acidic blood, circulation, ataxia, and that's when you can't walk properly. And again, due to the effects of alcohol, you can lose the power of your legs almost. So I'll go to emotionally, the shame and the guilt, and those are the big ones that hold a lot of people back, especially in recovery and even in addiction, is the shame. They feel bad or dirty because they have an addiction and feel guilty for what they've done. The fear and anxiety, of course, fear appears very real in addiction, and a lot of those fears are internal and irrational fears. And the anxiety is just a fear of the future, a fear of an uncertain future. And most people in addiction are full of anxiety because they don't know what the outcomes are. They don't know how they're going to cope, even in recovery. How will I survive a day without my alcohol or drugs? And that can make people very anxious. And the paranoia is an extreme form of, I suppose, anxiety. And again, that goes along with the fear of being around people, becoming antisocial, introverted, isolated. So when you're in company of other people, you do think or feel that they are all looking at you and talking about you. Self-pity and depression, again, can be just the feeling of depression, not so much clinical depression. And then the self-pity, the poor me's, where nobody loves me, nobody likes me, nobody cares for me, they're all out to get me, etc. At least the self-loathing, you hate yourself, and then very low self-worth. And that all compounded leads to the denial that there is a problem in the first place, because reality is a painful place to go to. Anger as part of that, lashing out. Attack as a means of defense. Resentments, resenting other people, resenting yourself, resenting situations, resenting life. And egotistical, in a sense, not about being big-headed or opinionated, but in the sense the ego telling you that you're no good, you'll never be good enough, you'll never succeed, so don't even try. And then the deceit, the self-deceit, the lies, the denial that you tell yourself and believe in yourself. And again, from doing all this, you do start to believe in it, yourself over a period of time. Emotional isolation, and again, as I say, you might be within a crowd, but feel very isolated, very lonely, very introverted. And emotionally immature, and that happens to nearly everybody. It's almost like your emotions stop developing when you start drinking or using. And then in recovery, they have to kind of come back. And that's why, working through feelings is the quickest way to work through addiction and recovery, because you have to get the feelings working again inside of people. But it does take time for those feelings to come back. And most people in early recovery will be on what we call an emotional roller coaster. And their moods will swing up and down all day long. But that's okay. That's just your emotions coming back. But, you have to let your emotions happen. And you see a 20, 30-year-old man or woman behaving like a teenager, and that's the emotional immaturity that they have. And then the blame, pointing the finger at everything and everybody else, and that's just nature of addiction, not taking responsibility. So spiritually, so disconnected from life and reality. And anybody who has suffered from addiction, can relate to this. I know I can relate to this. And I felt like I was there and everybody else was over here on the other side, and there's a big plate of glass in between the two of us, and there was just no way of getting through. And there was fear of getting through. And if people came from that side to try and help, you kind of blocked them off because you didn't feel deserving, didn't feel that you're good enough in a sense. And that's the disconnection from being part of. And even in family situations, you find people become disconnected, spiritually disconnected from even their family members. And it's a terrible state of terrible place to be in, because part of you does long to reconnect with other people, but you just feel that you can't, that you don't deserve to, that they don't want you, or you'll be a burden, and then your best friend or what you do connect to is your alcohol or drugs, strange enough. Become morally dead in the sense, right from wrong, wrong from right, gets a bit mixed up. Yes, you still have, a moral code to an extent, but it won't mean as much to you anymore. It won't be as important anymore. Loss of values, so those are the values that you were brought up with, or even your own values of how you see right from wrong. Sometimes you adopt other people's values, but you don't even know what your own values are anymore. a loss of faith, faith in your higher power, in God, faith in yourself, faith in recovery, faith in life, a sense of hopelessness, again, no light at the end of the tunnel, so to say, and then even suicidal, and that suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, even suicidal attempts and even completed suicide. So social rejects, and in the sense, sorry, either people reject you, you reject them, works both ways. Nobody wants to hang around a drunk person. And that's just the fact of it. If you go into a bar and someone's sitting over there and they're drunk, you're going to go to the other side of the bar, won't you? And that's just it. So people avoid people who are drinking or using. There's a stigma against alcohol, there's a stigma against drugs. So alcoholics and drug addicts are dirty people, so you push them away. And then they do the same themselves because they feel that way in themselves too. So they will also avoid not being able to face other people. Again, shame and guilt play into that. So stop socializing over a period of time. And like we deal with a lot of young people in treatment and recovery. And that's one of the biggest things that they miss or they crave is the social setting, going out, nights out and that. But they do say, well, why do they want these nights out? Because before they came into treatment, they had stopped socializing because they couldn't trust themselves to go out on the night out because they would get drunk or high or whatever and make a complete nuisance of themselves and get themselves into trouble and to bother. So it wasn't worth it. So suddenly this notion now I want to start socializing because I'm in recovery, it's not going to work in that sense. It didn't work before, so it's not going to work now either. Becoming a recluse and again, by yourself. And again, most, I suppose, talking about alcoholics or even drug users will go into small groups. Alcoholics will end up drinking on their own at home or elsewhere. And the irrational fears, and that's just afraid of everything, but the whole coming from within, but think everything is out there is dangerous. The world is a dangerous place. Unemployable, of course, who's going to want to employ someone who is going to be unreliable and will not turn up for work or might turn up drunk, have a bad track record. And then family rejection, again, families do bend over backwards most of the time, but there's times when everybody has to pull the plug and say enough is enough, can't do this no more, and that's what tends to happen then. A drain on state and family resources, hospitals, A&E departments, the probation service, the courts, the prison service, and all of that. And then, as I say, job loss, losing jobs because of alcohol and drugs. So fear is, everything revolves around that fear, and fear is predominant in addiction, and it's also pretty predominant in early recovery because it's all uncertain. It's new territory, it's like a completely new map of the world, and where do we go and how do we deal with it? So that fear is kind of ingrained in people. It's conditioned in people in addiction, So it's, how to face that fear. And, that fear is to say, most of it is irrational fear and it's inside the person. Well, chemical dependency works like this. If someone gave you a bottle of poison to drink and you knew that if you did, it would most likely kill you, would you drink it? And most people would say not in your nelly, but like, look at this, alcohol and drugs have been doing that for years. They have been slowly killing you, slowly breaking your body down, your body defenses down. So that's what they do, and that's what they do very well. So in essence, you are taking in poison every time you drink or you use. Right, so just to sum up, So just looked at what chemical dependency is, how it affects the whole body, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially, and not just one part. And it has to be kind of treated in that way as well. You have to cover all of those areas. It's not just physical or mental. You have to take the emotional side, the spiritual side, the social side, and everything together. And we looked at how it affects us again, the whole body and the whole being, and it's not just one area that's affected, but the whole lot. Right, well, that's my talk for today. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll have another one for you soon. All right, thanks, and have a lovely day. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. And how we need to avoid relapsing as best as we can and starting the whole process again, because that is what happens. Even though most relapses are a process and people don't deliberately intend to relapse initially, but when it does relapse, it's almost it's like starting the whole wheel of change again.